I was 18 years old and on my way home to California on summer break after my sophomore year of college. I had a 9-hour car ride ahead of me, so I stocked up on energy drinks, soda, and snacks for the ride home. I left school late after having dinner with friends and planned on driving into the night. I was making really good time. At this point, I was about 3 hours or so from home, which was Yuba City at the time. I was just an hour outside of Reno on a lonely stretch of road when it happened. I suddenly got the urge to pee after having all those energy drinks. I regretted chugging them as I resisted the urge to use the bathroom, but the feeling continued to haunt me more and more. I kicked myself, regretting that and also not stopping at a rest stop I had passed 25 minutes ago. As I continued driving, I saw a sign that advertised a rest stop coming up, so I drove a few more miles to it, then finally pulled in. Parked in the corner of the parking lot was a ratchet-looking sedan, and on the other side of the lot, there was a gray Sprinter-type van. I quickly got out and briskly jogged to the restroom. Right as I flushed the toilet, I heard someone enter, and I immediately froze. I'm in decent physical shape, and I work out quite often, but for a guy, I'm on the smaller side. I'm only 5'7" and 160 pounds soaking wet. I stood there, bracing myself for some Michael Myers type of deal. When I opened the door, I looked up to see an average Joe-looking guy. He looked up and gave me a friendly smile, then stepped over to the urinal. I washed my hands and was getting ready to leave when he started talking to me. His voice was gravely and low, so I couldn't hear him for the first time. "You like dogs, man?" he asked me as he washed his hands. He was wearing those overalls that mechanics wear, which were covered in grease stains. My creeper meter started beeping. I shot him a friendly smile and said, "Yeah man, dogs are cool," as I left the bathroom. Well, that was the wrong thing to say, because he followed me out the door, almost on my heels. "I got a new puppy. Want to see him? He's real cute." Now I was freaking out. I started walking to my car, holding my key in one hand and my cell phone in the other. I called back to him in a shaky voice saying, "No thanks, gotta get going." Right as I started to get in my car, he grabbed the door, trying to open it wide. The dude was strong, and he was at least a few inches smaller than me. I started my car and put my phone in my ear. What he said next still gives me chills to this day. "By the time the cops get here, you'll already be dead." Hearing that totally horrified me, but it gave me an immense adrenaline boost. I kicked him hard as I could at his stomach, and thankfully it connected, causing him to let go of the door and fall on his back. I proceeded to lock the doors as I screeched out of the rest stop parking lot. I saw him get back up as he scrambled for his car, but I didn't stay around. I took off like a bat out of hell. I was a nervous wreck for the next 3 hours, thinking he was going to follow me home and finish me off. I made sure to take an entirely different route when I went back to school in the fall, and because of that, I've never stopped at another rest stop since that night. I was heading from Dayton, Ohio, up to a show in Cleveland. When I was about 30 minutes from my destination, I pulled over to a rest stop to take my last bathroom break. I went in, took care of business, and walked back out to my car. When I turned the key, the engine sputtered and wouldn't start. At the time, I was only 16, so I was still pretty reliant on my parents and knew nothing about cars, so I called up my dad and had him arrange the details to get someone to come out for me and my car. After about an hour of waiting, the truck pulled up and I felt relieved that I would be able to head home after all the stress, not even bummed out that I was missing the show. It was around 7 now, and I was also getting tired. My initial sense of relief quickly turned into quite the opposite. At first, I thought that the driver was nothing more than an average guy until the ride home. As soon as I got into his truck, he asked me why I was out here all alone and if anybody was going to look for me. I realized how weird of a question it was, but proceeded to answer, saying it just to relieve tension. While we were on the way back, after about 30 minutes, he asked me if I wanted to get something to eat from McDonald's. I said yes, since I hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. As I was standing in line at McDonald's, I could feel his eyes just staring at me from behind. I turned and glanced over my shoulder, and noticed him blatantly looking at me and licking his lips. At this point, I had no idea what to do, so I got my food and returned to the truck trying to keep to myself. I just wanted the ride to be over with. He eventually came out with his food, and we began driving again. After sitting there in silence for a while, I heard the strangest sentence someone has ever said to me. "If you sit there and act like a deer, I'm going to treat you like one." I sat there, creeped out and defenseless, and replied with an awkward chuckle. Right after that, he pulled out a decent-sized pocket knife and just held it up by the steering wheel. He wasn't threatening me with it, but he looked at it as if he was almost admiring it. To break the silence, since I didn't want to be gutted, I asked him if he had any good stories about some of his pickups with customers on the job. He gave me some weird story about a girl he picked up whose car had broken down, and they ended up dating or something. I guess this was good to hear, because I figured that maybe he had some normalcy to him. A bit later, he pulled out an old flip phone and asked if I wanted to see something funny, so I said sure. He told me to scoot closer to the middle of the seat, and out of pure stupidity, I did. Right as I moved, he threw his arm over my shoulder faster than I could process what happened. He said it was hard to show me the videos on his phone while he was driving, so he gave me his phone and told me to look at his camera roll. The first video I clicked on was a messed up video of someone getting hurt. I told him that it was messed up and not funny at all. He let out the most manic laughter I've ever heard. I tried to scoot back to the right, but he had a stiff arm to the side of me that I could tell was not going to move. He told me that he had better videos and insisted that I should keep looking, but I replied saying no. Once we neared the town I lived in, he asked where my apartment was, since he didn't know my age. I told him it was at my dad's house, and he immediately stopped the truck and said, "Just when I thought this was going to be fun." He pulled over on the side of the road and let my car down, about 10 minutes away from my house. He got back in and told me that this was as far as he could go, and said that he will see me again soon. I looked at him, puzzled, not knowing what to say. I didn't even pay him, and I didn't see how he couldn't drive 10 more minutes, but I didn't care. As soon as I got out, he pulled off. My phone was dead, so I proceeded to just walk the rest of the way home. As soon as I walked in, my dad asked me where I had been and who brought me home. I told him the story about the creepy truck driver and how I felt terrified the entire time. His eyes widened, and he told me that the tow truck service he called had notified him, saying that I wasn't there when they sent out a driver. I generally try to not think about what happened on my way back from Tennessee. There are so many things that happened that night, and none of them can be really explained. My girlfriend and I had gone on a 3-day vacation in Nashville in order to meet up with my buddy and his girlfriend. The trip itself was phenomenal, plenty of alone time, poking through the small and kitschy shops, and generally just enjoying ourselves. It wasn't until we left for home that things got intensely terrifying. We left later than we should have, honestly just because of the fact that we were really enjoying being away from it all. It was around 9 at night when we hit Kentucky, and it was pitch black outside. We decided to stop at a rest stop that was coming up, even though it was a little shoddy looking. They always seem to be hit or miss. Well, this one was absolutely decrepit. We pulled in our car, and things just felt inexplicably off. We looked at each other, and I could tell we were thinking the exact same thing. Something was wrong here. The lights were a little too orange, and we were the only car there. All of it came down to one simple feeling, that we both just felt in our bones. We were in a really creepy spot. We tried to laugh it off, and decided that one of us would stay in the car, while the other one went to the bathroom, and then we could switch off. I don't really think we even questioned our mentality at the time, but rest assured, knowing I would never let my girlfriend walk around by herself if I felt there was something threatening out there. There was just something fetid in the air, scrambling our brains. My girlfriend went first and came sprinting out to the car, in what was probably only 3 minutes. It felt like an eternity. I kept looking at the building, seeing things materialize out of the shadows, but continuing to dissipate through the fog. She came back into the car, and I took the time to jump out to do my business. Even though every fiber of my being screamed out at my ineffectual, numbed mind, I still trudged to the men's bathroom. I noticed that there was a lock on the outside of the door. My mind tried to process this insanity, a lock on the outside. My mind kept reading this piece of information to me over and over again, but I simply pulled the door open. The light had a sick, greenish tint to it when I entered the bathroom, and there was a man with his back to me at the only urinal. Instead of waiting for him, I went into the only stall. There was something in the back of my mind poking at me, telling me that I didn't want to see his face. I felt like I was coated in molasses. Every movement felt like it was in slow motion. I finally finished and zipped myself up. When I exited the stall, the man was standing directly in front of the stall. I gasped in surprise. You scared me," I stuttered. He grinned at me. It wasn't friendly, but rather the grin of a madman that had never held back in his life. It was the grin of someone that wouldn't think twice about a murder, a grin that reeked of sadism and unadulterated evil. His hair was stringy, dirty, and hung around his shoulders, though he had none on the top of his head. What was left of his teeth were rotting in a sickly greenish yellow. There were terrible boils on his face and neck, but that wasn't the worst visual. Not by a long shot. He was missing an eye, but there was skin over the socket, as if he'd been born that way. "Care to wash your hands?" he inquired politely. His voice didn't match his physical appearance. It was cultured and disaffected. All of a sudden, it felt as though this exchange had lasted for hours. To this day, I believe that the only thing that snapped me out of the fugue was one thought: my girlfriend. I darted past the man and pushed the door open with all my might. It didn't seem to be that heavy when I entered. The man laughed heartily, and all of a sudden I felt wrong, like I was no longer alone in my mind, like there was someone on my back. The sensation didn't go away, even when I looked behind me and didn't see anyone. I jumped in the car, and my girlfriend reversed quickly, tires squealing. Once we got back onto the highway, I kept looking in the back seat. I was just convinced that we were bringing something home with us. I was so preoccupied with this morbid thought that I didn't notice my girlfriend staring at me strangely. She insisted that I wasn't myself. I attempted to calm her, but it just made things worse. She screamed, "Why are you smiling like that?" That snapped me out of it, and whatever I was feeling dissipated. My surety that something was in the back seat faded to a dubious confusion, and my girlfriend slowly began to understand that it was really me again. She told me later through tears that I'd been smiling at her the same way I described that man smiling. We tried to find any record of an abandoned rest stop or something terrible happening at one in Kentucky and could find no records. Both of us were in such a hurry to leave that wretched place that neither of us looked around to see where it was. All I can say is that both of us still look back on that and shudder. Something from hell hitched a ride with me, and although nothing has happened since then, it was horrific and sobering. Something horrific challenged our wills, and it won for a while. I doubt that I'll ever understand what happened that night. I just hope that it never happens to anyone else.